Welcome back into One Royal Way, brought to you by Kansas City Strength and Conditioning. If you are a baseball player or a softball player, if you know of one in the area, be sure to check out Kansas City Strength and Conditioning. It's the best place to help them be their best, help them be their best. I'm getting better. I'll get better at these ad reads as we move on here, folks. Uh, but joining me tonight is Alec Lewis, Kansas City Royals writer for The Athletic. If you're not subscribed to The Athletic, you need to be. I don't know what you've been doing for these last couple of years, but Alec has done an amazing job for the last few seasons covering the Royals. And joining me tonight to really talk about the state of baseball. And we're now 48 hours removed or so from Commissioner Manfred canceling games. Really, the season is still up in the air at this point. So, just a quick temperature check. How are you feeling? Obviously, this has been stressful in your line of work. I'm sure, just from a fan perspective, it's just been annoying.
Yeah, first, thanks for having me, Joel, and for the comment on The Athletic. Really appreciate that. It's been I'm grateful every day for the opportunity that I have. I say that a lot, but it's true, and I'm often reminded of it. It's reminded last week when I was in Arizona. But in terms of this week, it's been a tough one, and I've thought about that and how emotionally invested I've been, and how kind of in somewhat of a depressed state that I've been at points in these last couple of days, and I've thought about, is that okay? In my job, I'm a writer. I write about it. And can you have these types of emotions? It's probably a bigger journalist conversation, but I just think if you care about baseball, if you care about, I don't know, so many people whose livelihoods are affected by this, then you probably are going to be, you're going to be emotionally invested, and it's going to matter to you. And I think some of it is obviously selfish. It would be lying if I would love to be around the game. I would love to be watching games. I think I would love to be in the community that is Kauffman Stadium during the summer. But I think a lot of it is more really just thinking about how many people are affected by this, and think in the context that it probably didn't have to happen this way. So it's a long-winded answer, but I've thought a lot about the way I felt, which has not been the best, to be honest.
Generally, that's kind of how I felt that last thing you said, where it didn't have to be this way. And I think that's been my general sentiment over the last couple of days. And I've run the gamut of emotions. When the lockout first happened, it was inevitable. We all knew it was coming, but didn't think it was going to bleed into the season like this. It always felt like, okay, they'll figure it out. Because historically, when there has been owner-induced lockouts, there's never been games missed. They've always been able to work out CBA and get rolling. Player strikes are different. But on that side of it, a lockout induced by the owners and the commissioner of baseball, there's never been games missed, and now we have that for the first time ever. So I hope Rob Manfred's happy with that one. But going back to it doesn't have to be this way. They set the lockout and then don't talk to the players for 6 weeks. Like that, you want to talk about how they procrastinated and everyone was running up into the end. You didn't have to do that. You could have got back to the negotiating table on December 3rd and figured this out. And instead they chose not to. And now the optics surrounding all of this just look ugly. Especially when you can consider the people that are really going, this was a long game by the owners to basically miss a month of the year. Their least, the least amount of money they make is in April. That you can look back at the numbers. That is true, because the weather, especially in northern states and all that, it's unpredictable, cold, people don't want to go, and all of that. So it's a gamut, it was just playing the long con of, you're going to make more money in May through September now, and you're able to shave a little bit of money off the top with the TV revenue, because more people are going to go to games as well, and the TV revenue goes up as the season goes on. I mean, the optics of it look really bad.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's been, the public rhetoric surrounding this whole thing has been terrible. It was terrible in 2020. And I think I've thought a lot recently, and obviously these last couple of days, about, it's often said, this is billionaires versus millionaires. And I've listened to people say that, and I just think I've come to the idea that I think it's just the laziest characterization of the situation that can be, because as the numbers show, and again, I try to traffic in fact a lot of time, because there's a lot that's said, there's a lot of different perspective, there's a lot of things that I don't know. I can't act like I know the perspective of each person involved in this situation, but the fact that are available that I do know is that revenues in this sport have increased year over year over year, and the player compensation has not evolved with that. And so to say billionaires versus millionaires, specifically when the players here, whatever millionaires you want to say, a lot of them aren't, frankly. When the players are the product, the thing that is leading to the revenue increase, feel as if they need to be compensated at a higher level. I think you have to talk in that type of context. I've heard, I think, a lot of lazy characterization, and it frustrated me. And I think I say that knowing that I don't know everything. I'm 24. I wasn't around for the strike in 1994. I've read bits and pieces of Lords of the Realm, which is it's just an essential book in talking about in relating to this subject. I've done as much reading on this current situation as possible, but it's a complex situation. It really is. And so, and I don't know how much it helps often to have certain people in certain corners provide perspective without so much fact. And I say that thinking a lot about the Twitter situation over the last week. I mean, it's just been kind of a mess, and I don't think it's helped anything. But the way, I live and that we live, I'm on it. So it's just tough. There's been a lot of frustration for me, and I told a Royals player this a month and a half ago. It's like I've just tried to sit back and listen and learn and try to garner as much perspective as I can. That's the only way I think I know how to rightfully operate at my age with where I'm at. But it's really tough because to go back, it just feels like, especially considering the revenues and how they've increased for owners, the players are deserving and the owners aren't budging. And it's really frustrating. It's sad, really.
Yeah, I mean, baseball, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that it profited $11 billion in 2021. And even in 2020, in a 60-game season, there was still right around a billion, if not more. Like this is a profitable sport, and to say otherwise is just patently false. Now, I don't know if the commissioner just thinks we're not reading or that we're all illiterate and we don't know how to look up these things because it's all readily available, man. But I think what makes this situation interesting compared to others is this is really the first labor dispute where social media controlled the narrative, especially on the player side. The owner, because for years and years, especially in '94 and on back, even though a little bit, the spat in 11 and 16 and some of these other ones, social media wasn't as big as it is now relative to where it was. And back then, the owners could control the narrative through reporters and people around Major League Baseball, traditional media, to make everyone think, oh, the players are just being greedy. Well, now we're seeing the complete other side of it where players are being honest and transparent. Like, we want to get a deal done, but we also need to be fairly compensated for this. Not just us, but the younger players like Max Scherzer. He's making $40 million this year, as he should. He's been the top 3 pitcher of this generation. But he's fighting for guys that are coming up that are making league minimum when league minimum doesn't has not adjusted for inflation in the last 10 years. And when you look at some of the other major sports, baseball plays the most games. It is the longest season, and players are not compensated in the same way that football players are, or NBA players are, or even NHL. So at some point, things have to change, and the players have dug their heels in, rightfully so, I think, to try and not only change the narrative, but I think to kind of flip the perception in their direction, which if you have a pulse, it's where you need to be honest, unless you are family members of the owners or something.
The comment you made about social media too, I think is really relevant in the sense that, the entire the rhetoric throughout each party, each negotiating side has played out through social media. And I think it makes it affects the way certain people think in a much different way. Britt Giroli at The Athletic wrote a column about this, about how much she believes social media has played a role with the players. I think you mentioned it, but the players are obviously trying to shift the perception. They're trying to shift the narrative. Part of that is because they these last couple CBAs, it's been a brutal go for the players.
Yes.
And so they find themselves in this position where they're doing obviously the right thing, the thing that they have to do in the nature of the union and how strong this union has been traditionally. But they find themselves here not by randomness. And so the other thing I wanted to say about social media as I was talking, you mentioned how many players have used it. I think it shows how unified they are. That
Yes.
no player, given how many players there are underneath this, involved in this unit, it shows how unified that you haven't seen any player spat with another. I mean, they are legitimately as unified as I've seen it. I'm really young, but you listen to others talk about how unified they are, and it seems pretty obvious. And I also thought you mentioned Max Scherzer and the money that he's making, or just the contract that he recently signed. And there was a really good column that Joe Posnanski wrote. He writes a lot of them pretty much every time he writes. It's a great column. He did one on Fangraphs and WAR value and how much it actually is akin to what a lot of these salaries are becoming. I mean, the WAR value usually translates pretty well. And a guy like Corbin Burns, for example, who won the Cy Young last year, pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers, I believe his Fangraphs value per WAR last year was like $59 million. I think he got paid the league minimum, which is $600,000 or something close to that. I think a little less than that, to be honest. So it is a mind-blowing thing when you kind of peel the onion back. But I think you mentioned the unification of the unified nature of this union right now, and I think it's been really interesting to see the way they have handled it, and it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to progress in terms of if they can remain as unified as they seem to be now, if more games are missed.
Just another perspective on the league minimum compared to some of the other money that's being thrown around. Like Pete Alonso is going into his 4th year, so he's made the league minimum for the last 3, which is again right around $600K. He's made more money winning 2 home run derbies than he has in 3 years of baseball. Because you get $1 million for winning that. He's won it twice.
It's mind blowing.
It is. And so going back to talking about traditional media for a second, because generally I think we all got on Monday night when reports started coming out. I don't know how plugged in you were, but at least as a fan and just someone that was following the stories, that, hey, these guys, like, they might be close after, negotiating for 15 hours. Hey, we might be closer than we think. They're going to extend the deadline to get things done tomorrow. Casual, me, that I don't have it. I'm not plugged in enough to understand or know, thinks, and I'm sure and I know that I'm not alone in this, was thinking, okay, hey, who knows? This might get done. And we might not miss anything. Very quickly that changed. And I think that took me from like sad and to just flat out angry, because it was very clear that was a targeted move to try and flip the narrative back onto the players. Well, hey, we were close and the players won't agree to a deal. Right. And that felt like the attempt at that. And I promise, I know I'm talking to a professional journalist and I'm not trying to take shots,
No.
but you can see, at least from my perspective as someone who talks into a microphone and is a fan, that the frustration that would cause and the frustration that it did cause.
100%. I mean, it was a roller coaster, even for me.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned it. You asked, am I plugged in? I talked to certain people. I definitely, early in the week, had a great deal of skepticism about a lot of the optimism that surfaced. I mean, that's just
Right.
the reality, because I've seen the way I see the tenor of this going back to 2020 and how brutal that was. So I think there was a healthy bit of skepticism, but as you see it play out on social media, and I think because I hope that baseball is back on the field, because I think it's important for the game, for the sport, for the future health of the sport. Like, you want to believe it. So, I mean, I would be lying if I said, like, I didn't believe that there was a chance and that things may have turned, because all along we talked about negotiations could spur a deal. The deadline could spur a deal. So I mean, that was obviously the owners imposed this deadline, and then they moved their deadline because they're continuing to apply as much pressure as they can, because that's been their prerogative throughout this entire thing. But yeah, it was very tough. And I mean, I guess I'll speak a little to the business. A lot of times you hear certain things from a lot of different people who have a reason to provide those things. I mean,
Right.
You have to often, I mean, it's a dangerous game. It really is, because there are people you trust that I think over time relationships build. And again, I say this, I'm very young, so I'm learning every day this type of stuff. I just know that anytime I'm getting something that is at a level of, and not the context of labor negotiations, but even if it's a scoop or anything, you have to really double check, triple check, be sure, think about the context of all of it, because it has these repercussions. A report does make someone like you and even me, Joel, like think a certain way and shape a narrative. I mean, so there's a lot that goes into these things that I've learned, and I will continue to learn. It's another good reminder that you just have to be so cognizant of I guess, like the reason behind why someone would offer something up, and how to handle that, and how to make sure that it has to be verified many times over before you put things out.
Yeah, I try. I generally am not like, oh, the crooked media. Like, that's not. I'm not that guy. But I also have a significant BS meter, and I call it like I see it, and that's genuinely when you could see, like, even Jeff Passan, you could tell, who I think is one of the best baseball journalists out there. Like,
It's incredible.
he was even like, yeah, whatever's going on here isn't right. When I saw his tune change, I went, oh, okay, here we go. And then I just want to hit on this. We can hit on this as quickly as we want, or we can move on. But I was obviously very sad when that deadline hit. No deal. Games are being canceled, and then you see the press conference with Rob Manfred, and taken out of the image and video, taken out of context or not, the optics of it, like I mentioned earlier, are awful. To see one of the saddest days in the sports history take place right before our eyes, and the commissioner is on the podium laughing and smiling. I know he's happy because he did his job, because the people that pay his paycheck, he helped them get what they wanted. But that doesn't make it right. And as a fan, that made me angry. And I know that you obviously are a journalist. You have to have some sort of like fan taken out of it. You have to be objective and all that. Totally understand that. But as a fan of the sport itself, how did that land for you?
I mean, Dayton Moore said, and I don't know if froze up a little bit there, Joel, but Dayton Moore said his stomach was in knots. I felt like pretty sick. I mean, and that's at that point. And I mean, I've said this before publicly, but like I grew up loving baseball. My favorite sport to play. It was my favorite sport to watch. Then I kind of fell out of love with it. And then I got this job in 2019, and it's rekindled everything that I had as a kid, and so that I believed as a kid. And so, and I don't think I would have expected to feel the way I felt 3 years ago, but it really got to me. And it was, yeah, it was just devastating because, again, and maybe this is just me, maybe it is like somewhat of a hokey thought, but like I think about a lot of this in terms of community. Like the players are no longer going to be in their normal community at the time they expect to be in, and I'm talking about coaches, support staff, their teammates, like people. Human beings need community, and we thrive off of that. And so so do the fans, so do the people who work at Kauffman Stadium, so do ancillary other elements of this. And so to make that announcement, to cancel 2 series of games, when I wondered, why can't you just continue to negotiate? Obviously, you've been negotiating for days, but why does this have to end right now?
And they didn't even have to.
It was
They didn't have to
it
lock
was
out the
really
players in the first place either.
exactly right, exactly. It was really tough. And I mean, you mentioned Manfred, and I said earlier, like I try to traffic in fact as much as I can. And so I mean, I cannot imagine what the job truly entails as a commissioner of baseball. There's a lot of elements to it that I will never understand unless I'm the commissioner. Can't imagine I'm going to be the commissioner one day.
Not a job I want.
But the tone that often comes with the way Rob Manfred speaks, and it's almost like public speaking awareness. It just really at times it's hard to watch, and I think it's part of the reason that the players are so unified right now. I think it has really contributed to their frustration and their pain and their anger. I don't think that has helped any of this at all. But it was a really tough day. Like it really was. I'll say this. I mean, I didn't know who to read. Like, I didn't know. I want to talk about it. Like I'm sure you're this way, Joel. When you're going through something, when something's pretty
Yep.
hard, and I'm not gonna make this out. This is not war. This is not what. But it hurt, like affected me. And so I'm like, who do I reach out to? One person I thought to reach out to, and people may laugh at this, but it's someone I know loves the game, and that was Dayton. And at that point, I didn't know he was going to speak to the media the following day. But it just, there are a lot of people in this game beyond Dayton that I'd also talked to, but he was one of them, just considering how much I know he cares. But a lot of these people were just, I think, just they felt power. They don't have any control over the situation, but they felt like I poured in years of my life to make sure this game is better, and this is how this is going to work without me having any control. It is relentlessly difficult, not just for me, but for a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, it's still tough. It still gets to me.
Yeah, so let's go to that press conference that Dayton Moore did. I didn't know that he was going to speak to the media either. I saw that you and Annie Rogers and others were talking about it. I saw little snippets of what he said, but you were sitting there on the Zoom call, I assume. What were just some overarching thoughts from what he said?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of assess it from the vibe of the whole thing. I mean, it was really interesting. No other executive spoken publicly about the labor matters since the owners locked out the players December 2nd. I thought that was, just for him to speak, was an interesting one from the get-go. But he started it out that he's like, I just want to talk about the heart of baseball. And the reason for that is, as he would later say, in times like these where it feels like the thing you love is kind of being ripped away from you, he's like, I go back to the point at which I fell in love with it and why I fell in love with it. And for him, that goes back to when he was keeping score sitting in his grandmother's living room and watching George Brett, and that inspiring him not only to be with other people and watch the game, but also to play. And so he said a lot. His quote that he often uses is, I view the game. He's like, I think we have to view the game from the eyes of our youth. And I think he believes that has been lost for a lot of people. And some people haven't viewed the game. They didn't view the game at their youth. They got into this for money, and that's their view. And so throughout the conversation, as it played out, that's what I could think about. Is like, is this perspective, Dayton Moore's perspective, is it how different is it because of the way he was brought up in the game, which is much different than how a lot of people are brought up in the game now, and how a lot of the owners get to be where they are. So it was a fascinating one. He was emotional. Like early on in the conversation, you could see the emotion in his face. It really, the whole situation really pains him. He just wants to watch baseball. He's like a lot of people. But the issue is he has to run an organization, so he has to I don't have the right tone, and he knows that. And so I think that was part of the reason he spoke too, to not only talk to fans, to not only air things out for himself, but also to speak to people in his organization who need uplifting.
Yeah, I didn't know that he was also the first executive to make any sort of public comment. I think not only is that very on brand for Dayton Moore, but I think it speaks to the way he feels about this. And I mean, obviously, he's not in the room that, in the same boat that the owners are, where he has the skin in the game that they do. But that he loves the game, and it just kind of goes back to the way he treats people and treats the organization. There's not much that you can say poorly about him. Like, he's one of the best men in the sport, and it's not shocking that he would say the things that he did and have the press conference that he did.
I mean, Whit Merrifield said on 610 Sports Radio, and I might be freezing up again, Joel, but Whit Merrifield said on 610 Sports Radio that, he said and he was talking about John Sherman and how he believes John Sherman views the game the right way. John Sherman has been a longtime Royals fan. He loves baseball. I know that. Whit obviously knows that too. And Whit said about John Sherman on 610 Sports Radio, he said, look, like I think if we had 30 owners, 29 other owners like John Sherman, we would not be in this situation. I think if you had more people like Dayton Moore in the game, we wouldn't be in this situation. Again, you can criticize Dayton Moore for a lot of things on the field, certain elements, but it often seems like he has the game's best interest at heart and thinks a lot about the game in the future. He talked about the game. He said success. He talked about life, and he talked about the game. He said success yesterday does not guarantee success tomorrow. And we in baseball, we as human beings and everything, have to fight for the admiration, the respect, and the trust of the fans every single day. And for him to say that, I mean, it's just leader words. It's what a leader says. It's an awareness that comes with experience.
And it's also the authenticity with which he speaks when he talks about having the fans' best interests at heart and the youth of the game and all. It's legitimate because he has shown it over years and years and years. When on the same day and in the same press conference, when Commissioner Manfred says that we have the fans' best interests in mind when he is canceling games when they don't have to after setting an arbitrary deadline to have the deal done, you can see the inauthenticity with which he is talking. And so the dichotomy there is very interesting.
It's stark without
Mhm.
question. I mean, it is. I mean, Dayton said Rob Manfred, after he got the commissioner's job, he visited all 30 clubs and he spent time at the front office and the coaches and the players. And Dayton said at that time, I was really impressed by that. I really believed he loves the game. Dayton said that. But I think, I mean, Dayton. Dayton believes in people. He believes in the good of people. It's just such an incredible quality. And I think at times that can probably be like any of us. We believe in someone and they disappoint us. That's
Yep.
how a lot of things work in life. And I mean, yeah, I want to believe Rob Manfred really cares about baseball. Then I see him say what he says about the World Series trophy.
Right.
And I see him up there saying, I hope against hope we didn't reach this situation. And again, there are elements beyond my understanding, but it's tough to believe the more and more you see certain things. That's me editorializing, but I felt it's how I
No,
feel.
you're absolutely right. And you to talk about some of those negative headlines, it's all baseball's been for the last 2 years. And that is and this just adds more to the snowball that's been rolling downhill for the last 2 years. The tune has to change fast. If there is so much more to look at and to do, people will walk away from the game. I know as a passionate baseball fan, I will continue. I will be there on opening day. I will be there through the good and the bad. Baseball has been my favorite sport since I was 2. That's not gonna change because of a labor dispute. It's not. But for the person that was just starting to get into baseball, they saw how awesome Shohei Ohtani is and how electric Fernando Tatis Jr. is, and the casual Kansas City fan that loves the Chiefs, and they see Bobby Witt Jr. is coming to Kansas City, and they're ready to get back into it because they know that, hey, there's a chance here that the Royals can be good again. They're gonna walk away. I mean, the NBA finals will be starting, the NBA playoffs will be going right when opening day is happening. Football, we're right after the NFL draft. Why would they pay attention to the game? And that's the worst thing that can happen. And when you consider over the last 2 years, just in the last 2 years, think about all the awful headlines that have dominated. Thankfully, Shohei was amazing and took away some of that. But you had the Astros cheating scandal at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And then obviously COVID wiped out most of the season. Then you had the labor dispute that happened there, and the owners were able to get what they want to play 60 games, and how ugly that played out. And then you have and you also add in the piece of metal comments before 2020 as well. And then you come into 2021, you have the sticky stuff, how ugly that turned out to be and how that was a mark on the game, if you will. And now you have this. It's like it's never ending, and baseball can't help but self-sabotage and get in its own way. It has to change really, really soon, or people will continue to walk away. And this is a sport that's already struggling despite the money coming in. Perception-wise, it is struggling.
You trying to make me more depressed, Joel?
I'm really sorry. I mean, that I don't trust me like saying it. I'm
Listen,
like, you gotta be freaking kidding me.
Listen, though, I've worried. I mean, I've thought this whole situation, like, are the people in charge seeing the forest for the trees here? Short term, they want money games, obviously, but money gains, not games. If they wanted games, they'd be playing. But I think I've thought a lot about, like, it's crazy. The way the game is played right now, the three true outcomes narrative, people talk about shifts. There are a lot of different elements. That is like totally on the back burner right now. Whereas when you've seen it in the NFL, when the quality kind of suffers, they do some things. When it suffers from an entertainment perspective, they do things to alter it. They change the game. Yes, people get mad early on, but guess what? People still watch it. The NFL is relentlessly fascinating every Sunday. And so to see that baseball probably, I mean, the rules that really need to be talked about to change the game, to make it more palatable in the eyes of young people and more interesting from that standpoint, to see that those things aren't even remotely close to the conversation or like even talked about right now in a great degree is really tough. I mean, Tom Verducci wrote a column about the efficiency of the game and how much he believes that's affected a lot of things in terms of not only the entertainment value, but also how these clubs are viewing players and as commodities. I think he's really right. Tony Clark made a reference to that. Made a reference to that earlier this week, but it's the game is in a. I want to be optimistic, like I really do. You mentioned Shohei Ohtani. You mentioned Fernando Tatis. People in Kansas City are going to see Bobby Witt Jr. They're going to absolutely love the guy. There's things to cling on to, but you want to make the game as entertaining as possible. Why wouldn't you? That's your product. That's what you're selling to TV markets going forward. And to not be doing that now at a critical juncture for the game with how the game is, it's seemingly losing relevance, and numbers could back that up or not. It's brutal. It really is brutal.
And it's losing relevance despite having the greatest collection of talent that the game has ever seen at one time. Like, and that's I think what's frustrating too. If this was like a dead period, so to speak, with like top talent in the game and everything in between, but I mean, you think about all the dudes under the age of 30 that are at the top of their game or getting there. I mean, we're gonna have we have the dude that's gonna make $500 million playing for the Washington Nationals right now. We have a dude coming off the greatest single season in the history of the sport. We have a dude that's his teammate that happens to be one of the probably 5 to 10 greatest players to ever walk the earth and step between the lines of a baseball diamond. Oh yeah, and Jacob deGrom throwing 95-mile-an-hour sliders. Like there's
I was gonna say it's absurd.
And so, like the game, like I think the baseball is dying argument is just one that people use on social media to try and like axe the game when they aren't even baseball fans to begin with and just want to chirp. But I do think like things need to change in some capacity, and hopefully the owners and the players can come to some sort of agreement that is good for both sides. And even the fact that the proposal the players are bringing out would still make the owners a crap ton of money to begin with. That's neither here nor there.
Yeah, you said the proposal is going to be good for the owners. I can promise you they're going to make sure of that.
Yeah, and even the one that the players brought to the owners would still have been very pro owner to begin with. But hopefully they can come to some sort of agreement that in 5 years we're not doing this all over again. Like in 2026 or 2027, we don't need to be back here. Because by then, I mean, you're in the prime of a lot of these guys, and then they're the guys that are coming behind him too. It just can't happen again. This cannot continue to persist and happen. No one loves self-destructing more than Major League Baseball. And that has to, like, the buck has to stop somewhere with that. So where do we go from here? Have you heard any indication of when the season could start?
No.
Cool.
There was on Thursday, we're speaking Thursday, there was a meeting between the two sides, I believe, in New York, 90-minute meeting. Not many details from that. I believe they talked about many different subjects, but I don't know if there was any specific proposal. I mean, I think you asked the question, when is the date? Have you heard a date? There have been certain bits of information that have been thrown out that I think could clue in a little bit, not just you, but everybody. I mean, I think Ken Rosenthal reported that teams would not RSNs would not ask for rebates on their contract until 25 games into the season. So the owners could conceivably, I guess, miss 25 games per their team into the season, and then potentially still recoup the money that they obviously would like from the RSNs, the regional sports network. So, I mean, I think that would be an interesting timeline. Maybe like it would have to be around end of April. So then you'd probably need a deal by the beginning of April to have a full spring training to prepare guys. So, I mean, I think that's probably right now what we're looking at. I keep coming back to the fact that Jackie Robinson's 75th anniversary is April of his, I believe, integration into Major League Baseball is April 15th. And if obviously there's not a deal by by March 15th to give a month for the players, that date, that celebration, which is not just important for baseball history, but also important, essential in American history, to not have baseball be playing on the day, to me, would just be a travesty and another just such bit of short-sightedness. But I think if it drifts past that rebate type date, I mean, it could. Who knows? Who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like the players are very unified right now, and the owners do not want to budge on many of the items. Most specifically, probably the I'm not calling it the competitive balance tax because it doesn't promote that. It's a luxury tax that acts as a soft salary cap.
Yeah. There is like I was full on Tuesday. I went full DEFCON 5. Like we'll see in 2023. Like I had just resigned myself to that because when I saw best and final, I thought they're done. Like that was it. I think that was just them playing hardball. Now that 48 hours have passed and my emotions have come down about 6 notches, I do think when they said we're willing to miss a month of games, I think that was what they meant when you look at some of the evidence of like we talked about earlier, where after about a month or so, April, by the middle to the end of April, the weather gets better. People are coming into the game a little bit more. You're making a little bit more money by then because the weather is better and more people can come in. And the NBA finals are starting to come around. There's just more like access to baseball that they're probably like I would imagine by the end of April at the like beginning of May at the latest. I think at this point is realistic. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. I'd still put it about 50-50 if we see baseball before about May 15th. But I think there was a little bit of like some coding in there of we're willing to miss a month. And that's what they meant. Like, okay, like, hey, end of April, let's get things rolling. Something along those lines, I think is very true. And players have talked about, okay, we need to have a deal done and then 4 weeks of spring training and then we go. So if hopefully I think they can get something done by the end of the month. It's March 3rd. I would not be shocked. I think they can if both are serious about it and the players are like, hey, let's figure this out. Because I know that like the thought of actually like once the threat of really losing money starts to creep in, that's when the owners will come to the table too, which is coming.
This is the balance that I'm trying to strike with myself. I want to be optimistic. You know me, Joel. I'm very optimistic by nature.
Mm-hmm.
I've also had the rug pulled out for me a ton of times, and I've seen the tenor of these negotiations going back to 2020. I've heard people talk about the time even before that. So I'm just naturally so skeptical right now.
I am too generally, but I think that at a certain point, like I've said this the whole offseason because I have people that don't follow baseball or kind of baseball fans or even like really passionate baseball fans that just aren't as tuned in. They're like, are we going to play? And I've always said once the threat of really losing money hits, that things will move quickly. And we're really getting to that point now. I don't think that the owners are dumb enough to miss a full season and miss out on all of that money. If baseball like made $11 billion thereabout in a season where for most of it in a lot of parts of the country, it was masks were required. You still had percentage of fans was only, it could only be so far until like August. And even then, some places still weren't that were still a little more strict about it. You essentially now in 2022, masks are really starting to go away. 100% crowds everywhere. No one's worried about it as much anymore. Like you're going to miss out on a lot in the first full, real, authentic, like normal-ish season in 2 years, in almost 3 years. So it would be asinine to me to like it would be asinine to think that the owners would actually miss out on a full season to play hardball. Like that to me doesn't make sense. That aspect of it to me like I would be at a loss. I have no idea what would happen then.
My only pushback, and I'm with you. I like it would be asinine, but it was also asinine for them to even miss any games. That's like how that's where
Also,
I am.
yeah.
But I will say this, and I keep doing this, and I have a point as you're talking, and it drifts for me. But you mentioned like the April it being cold in northern states, less fans, less revenue, et cetera. The most lucrative revenues at the end of the season and in the postseason. And so that's also part of it. I mean, they know that toward the end is when they're making the most money, the owners. So we'll see. Again, like it's if you ask me next week, maybe a weekend of recharged optimism, maybe I'm there. I mean, it's crazy. I mentioned it. Like, I was in Arizona, and it's my favorite time to be out there, be talking to people, see the joy, the entire environment in general. And so I cannot wait for that time. And the other thing, I wrote about this, but a guy like Sebastian Rivero, he's missed out on his whole community that he usually hangs out with at the facility. On the flip side, there's a guy like Michael Garcia in the Royal system, young shortstop who was out of the 40-man, who's from Venezuela, I believe, and he would not be in the big leagues at the beginning of this year, probably this year at all. And now he's just in purgatory where he can't even play in the minor leagues. And that's just so messed up to me. And the fact there's no flexibility with that is just it's brutal. Like, this is a young guy. Baseball means a lot to his life, to a lot of parts of his life. His teammates are probably a lot of his best friends. And now, because he's just got out of the 40-man, to protect him ahead of this draft that we don't even know if it's going to happen, the Rule 5 draft, is now he's just unable to play. It's really messed up. There's a lot of this stuff that it just really gets to me. And I try to be uplifting there with Arizona, and then look where I came back.
I mean, there's so many layers to this and so many ranges of emotions here. I mean, I get it, right? So this is still really fresh. Like I said, I've come down quite a bit from where it was. I'm glad we didn't record on Tuesday, because I would have been hellfire brimstone, and BJ would have probably told me that, hey, you're done doing this, because it would not have gone well. Hopefully I was a little more rational tonight. I think generally I feel a little more rational about it now. I think there was going to be baseball regardless. I mean, there still isn't college baseball is going to get a ton of run right now, which is kind of cool. The minor league season is unaffected, so Royals fans also. I'll plug Royals Farm Report, which will be out next week, back on the podcast rotation here at KCSN, where we're going to start kind of previewing the season. So there's still going to be baseball. To what degree, I don't know, but I plan to be at Kauffman Stadium and drinking a Boulevard at some point while I am there. And I want to have fun this summer. So that's what I really need to happen.
I want to watch Scott Barlow pitch every day for 162 games.
I want to watch Bobby Witt Jr. play shortstop or third base in Kauffman Stadium.
I've heard of him. I've heard of him.
I think he might be. I think he might be good. Maybe only like second or third best prospect in baseball, not a big deal.
There's a Peter Gammon story that either is on The Athletic right now or will be. It's not specific to Bobby Witt Jr., but there's a quote in there from a scouting director that people will want to check out. That's a little tease. But yeah, it's again, like, I love covering the games, and I love the stories that come with it. I love the job more than anything. But I'm gonna miss being up in the press box, messing around with the people that I enjoy. Maybe they're laughing at me a lot of the time, but I'm gonna miss being made fun of, because it's legitimately, like, it's become, since I started this job in 2019, that's my community in the summer, is a certain people. I mean, Dave on the field, who lets me down. Like, there's a lot of people there. Guy named Dick in the press box who signs my lunch check every single day. Like, I will miss those people if the longer that this thing goes. So and then there's the baseball part of it. That's pretty obvious with where the Royals have trended.
Yeah, well, hopefully we don't have to wait too much longer. I'm crossing my fingers, crossing my toes, crossing anything I can to hope that they can get this crap done and we can get back to baseball. Before I get you out of here, one lighthearted question: if you were to take an at bat in Kauffman Stadium, what would your walk-up song be?
I'm a big music guy. I sometimes publicize it, excuse me. Sometimes I don't. But I like a lot of rap. I've been on the Kanye documentary on Netflix has gotten me listening to College Dropout.
Ooh,
and the song Through the Wire is one of my favorites of all time. People can think what they want about Kanye. I understand why they would think a lot of the things they think about him, especially of late. But that's probably the beginning of that song, and the tune would probably be it. Kind of, that's one that I'll give you right now. But again, if you ask me tomorrow, I'd have a different song because I listen to a lot of music all the time.
I have such a hard time picking that. Like, every time that it depends on what mood I'm in. And I know that if I was a baseball player, I would change up my walk-up song like every series because it's always something different.
I will say I'm really glad that I don't have to take an at bat at Kauffman Stadium. Earlier this a month and a half ago, I stood in the cage against a 90-mile-an-hour curveball, and it was the most frightening situation.
That sounds awful.
It was, yeah, it was devastatingly frightening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's baseball. Hitting a baseball. I'll have some stories about this coming at some point soon. The complexity of hitting a baseball is just absurd.
Yeah, listening to guys talk about it, I'm like, yeah, there's no way. Well, hey, Alec, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. We will do this again soon. Um, be sure to go follow Alec on Twitter. It's Alec_Lewis, right?
You got it. Yep.
Cool. And
Yep.
then subscribe to The Athletic and read his stuff about the Royals. Thank you so much, guys. We will talk to you soon.